He fired me right in front of a journalist just to show off his power, but he never expected she'd be the one to turn on him. And me? I was the spark that turned his fake empire to ash. Want to know how that powerful CEO crumbled? Sit down. This isn't a story you can walk away from. My name is Mia Hartley. And until 3 months ago, I was the only thing standing between Brightcore Labs and complete operational collapse. At 38, I'd seen enough startup circus acts to know when the tent was about to come down. But even I didn't predict how spectacularly our CEO would light the match himself. The morning it all began started like any other in our Denver office. The familiar scent of burnt coffee mixed with the artificial pine from our janitor's discount cleaner. I arrived at 6:47 a.m., beating even our most eager engineers. The open floor plan stretched before me like a battlefield, with its forced casual beanbags and standing desks that nobody actually used for standing. Glass meeting rooms lined the walls, their transparency a joke considering all the real decisions happened in Asher's corner office with its conveniently frosted windows. Asher Lennox, even thinking his name now makes my jaw clench. 35 years old, with that particular brand of startup founder confidence that comes from failing upward through 3 previous ventures. He'd joined Brightcore 18 months ago, brought in by investors who'd fallen for his TED Talk about conscious leadership in the digital age. I'd watched that talk once. 17 minutes of beautifully crafted nothing, delivered with the kind of intensity that made VCs reach for their checkbooks. I pulled up our latest financials on my monitor, the numbers glowing like accusations in the pre-dawn dimness. We were hemorrhaging cash at a rate that would make a trauma surgeon nervous. Our burn rate had tripled since Asher's arrival, while our actual revenue had flatlined. But somehow, miraculously, our investor reports showed steady growth, the kind of growth that defied mathematics, but not, apparently, Asher's reality distortion field. My phone buzzed. A text from Priya, our lead engineer. Another one quit. That's 3 this month. I wasn't surprised. The engineering team had been in revolt ever since Asher implemented his fluid hierarchy system, which essentially meant nobody knew who was in charge of what, and every decision required a 2-hour alignment session that accomplished nothing except depleting our will to live. I'd been documenting everything in what I called my rainy day folder, screenshots of conflicting financial reports, emails where Asher explicitly asked me to massage the numbers, recordings of all-hands meetings where he promised features we had no intention of building to clients who barely existed. It started as insurance, a habit born from watching too many good people get thrown under too many buses. I never thought I'd actually need it. The office began filling up around 9. First came the engineers, shuffling to their desks with the defeated air of soldiers returning to a losing war. Then the sales team, their forced enthusiasm growing more brittle by the day. Finally, the design team, who'd learned to hide their actual work from Asher after he'd demanded a complete redesign of our UI based on a dream he'd had about transcendent user experiences. I was deep in a spreadsheet trying to figure out how we'd pay next month's AWS bill, when Rachel from PR appeared at my desk. Her usually perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. "Mia, we need to talk." She glanced around nervously. "Not here." We found an empty phone booth, one of those ridiculous isolation pods Asher had installed because he'd read about them in Fast Company. The second the door closed, Rachel's professional mask dropped. "Claudia Monroe is coming today." The name hit me like ice water. Claudia Monroe wasn't just any journalist. She was the one who'd exposed the Theranos of the fitness world last year, unraveling a $300 million fraud with surgical precision. If she was sniffing around Brightcore, it meant someone had talked. "When?" I asked. 2 hours. Asher's treating it like a victory lap. He thinks she's here to write a puff piece about our Series C. Rachel's laugh was bitter. He actually used the phrase unicorn trajectory in the prep meeting. Does he know who she really is? Oh, he knows. He thinks he can charm her. You know how he is. I did know. Asher had that particular Silicon Valley superpower of believing his own lies so completely that they became temporarily true in his presence. I'd watched him convince a room full of skeptical investors that our churn rate was actually a sign of healthy market selection. But Claudia Monroe wasn't a VC looking for the next big thing. She was a hunter, and she smelled blood. He wants you in the all hands, Rachel continued. Specifically requested you sit in the front row. Of course he did. I was his proof of diversity, his shield against accusations of running another boys' club. The only woman in senior leadership, old enough to lend gravitas but not so old as to challenge the young and hungry narrative. I'd played this role before, smiling for photographers while internally calculating how much longer I could stomach it. Back at my desk, I opened my rainy day folder and began organizing. If today went sideways, I wanted everything ready. Financial records, email chains, Slack screenshots showing Asher ordering employees to falsify user engagement metrics. The folder had grown to 2.3 GB over the past year. A digital monument to corporate malfeasance. At 10:55, Asher's assistant, Marcus, began herding everyone into the main conference area. The space had been cleared of its usual debris of half-finished projects and abandoned whiteboards. In their place stood a small podium and carefully arranged seating that managed to look both casual and choreographed. The whole thing reeked of manufactured authenticity, like a startup theme park. I took my assigned seat in the front row, between our CFO, David, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 5 months, and our head of sales, Jen, whose smile had long since fossilized into a rictus of false optimism. Ready for the show, David whispered. I have a feeling today's performance will be special, I replied. Asher entered exactly at 11, wearing his signature outfit, designer jeans, a black turtleneck that screamed, I've studied Steve Jobs, and sneakers that cost more than most people's rent. Close behind him walked Claudia Monroe. She wasn't what I'd expected from her byline photo. In person, she radiated a quiet intensity that made the room's energy shift. Mid-40s, wearing a simple gray blazer and jeans. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never met a CEO she couldn't dismantle. Her eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, body language, the subtle signs of dysfunction that we'd all gotten too good at hiding. Team! Asher's voice boomed with practiced enthusiasm. I want you all to meet Claudia Monroe from Insight Weekly. She's here to capture the Brightcore story, to show the world what conscious capitalism really looks like. A few people clapped weakly, most just stared, wondering if Asher had finally lost touch with reality entirely. Inviting an investigative journalist known for corporate takedowns to witness our story was like inviting an arsonist to tour your matchstick factory. I thought we'd start with something special. Asher continued, his smile widening. A real-time demonstration of our radical transparency and commitment to excellence. The phrase radical transparency from Asher was like hearing a wolf praise vegetarianism. But I kept my expression neutral, years of practice serving me well. Claudia had taken a seat to the side, notebook closed, observing. She wasn't writing anything down, which somehow made her presence more unsettling. Real journalists, the dangerous ones, they listened first. The notes came later, when they'd identified the threads worth pulling. As you all know, Asher began pacing, his hands moving in practiced gestures. Brightcore isn't just a company, it's a movement. We're not just building software, we're building the future of human connection. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Our software was a barely functional project management tool that crashed if more than 50 users logged in simultaneously. The future of human connection was held together with duct tape and the prayers of our overtaxed engineering team. But movements require sacrifice. They require us to constantly evolve, to shed what doesn't serve our mission. His eyes found mine. Which brings me to a difficult announcement. The room tensed. People exchanged glances, wondering who was about to be sacrificed on the altar of Asher's ego. I should have seen it coming, should have recognized the setup. But I'd gotten comfortable in my role as the competent one. The one who kept the lights on. Mia Hartley has been with us for 2 years, Asher said, his voice taking on a false note of regret. She's worked tirelessly in her role, but as we prepare for our next phase of growth, We need leaders who embody our values of innovation and positive energy. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was firing me, right here, in front of everyone, in front of a journalist, as some kind of power play. I'm afraid Mia's approach has become too rigid, too focused on limitations rather than possibilities. Effective immediately. We'll be parting ways. The silence that followed was deafening. 50 pairs of eyes turned to me, some sympathetic, some shocked, most just exhausted by another display of Asher's tyranny. I stood slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. I could fight back, could expose him right here, but that would be playing his game. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile I'd perfected in countless meetings with delusional founders and predatory VCs. Thank you for the opportunity, Asher. I wish Brightcore all the success it deserves. The implied threat in that last word hung in the air. Asher's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. He'd expected tears, anger, some display of emotion he could point to as evidence of my instability. Instead, I gave him nothing. I walked toward the exit with measured steps, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. As I passed Claudia Monroe, she looked up from the notebook she'd suddenly opened. Our eyes met for just a moment, and she asked quietly, "Do you have time to talk? I'd like to hear the real story." I paused, considering. Asher was already moving on, launching into a speech about courage in leadership and making hard choices. The sycophants in the audience nodded along, desperate to avoid being next. "I know a coffee shop," I said, just loud enough for her to hear. 2 blocks north. Give me an hour." She nodded once, a small motion that Asher, lost in his own performance, completely missed. I gathered my things quickly. My assistant, soon-to-be ex-assistant, Karen, helped me box up my desk, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. "This is bullshit," she whispered. "You're the only reason this place functions." "Not anymore," I said, hefting the box. "But maybe that's for the best." Security escorted me out. Another piece of theater for Asher's audience. I wondered if he'd planned this from the moment he'd heard Claudia was coming, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate his decisive leadership to someone who mattered. If so, he'd miscalculated badly. The Denver sun hit me like a slap after the artificial cave of the office. I loaded my box into my car, pulled out my phone, and opened the rainy day folder. 2.3 gigabytes of evidence. Enough to bury Brightcore and Asher Lennox so deep they'd need archaeology teams to find them. But first, coffee. And a conversation with a journalist who'd just witnessed a CEO hang himself with his own rope. The coffee shop was called Neutral Grounds, a deliberate choice on my part. It was the kind of place where tech workers came to complain about their bosses, where NDAs went to die over overpriced lattes. I arrived first, claiming a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances. I ordered a black coffee, needing the bitterness to match my mood. My phone buzzed continuously, messages from former colleagues expressing shock, anger, disbelief. I turned it face down. There would be time for that later. Claudia arrived 15 minutes later, having changed her blazer for a simple sweater. Smart. She was shifting from journalist at corporate event to friend having coffee. She ordered at the counter, taking her time, letting me settle. Another smart move. She understood that information extraction was like fishing. Patience mattered more than bait. "That was quite a performance," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Which part? The public execution or the speech about conscious capitalism?" She smiled. "Both. Though I have to say, I've seen a lot of CEOs throw people under the bus. Usually they're more subtle about it." Subtlety isn't Asher's strong suit. He prefers the grand gesture. I took a sip of coffee, weighing my options. "What did you think of his little show?" "I think a CEO who fires his COO during a journalist visit is either very confident or very stupid." She pulled out her notebook, but didn't open it. "I'm leaning toward the latter." "What makes you say that?" "Because he didn't realize you were the only person in that room who wasn't afraid of him." She leaned back, studying me. "The question is, are you angry enough to talk?" I laughed, surprising myself with its bitterness. Anger doesn't begin to cover it, but this isn't about feelings. This is about fraud. The word changed the atmosphere. Claudia's casual demeanor sharpened into something predatory. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious company. Or it was before Asher turned it into his personal Ponzi scheme. I'm going to need more than accusations. I pulled out my laptop, the weight of decision settling on my shoulders. Once I opened this door, there was no closing it. But I thought about Priya and her exhausted engineers, about David aging in dog years trying to make impossible numbers work, about all the employees who'd believed in Brightcore's mission before Asher had perverted it. Let me show you something, I said, opening the rainy day folder. The first document was our real P&L statement, the one I maintained in secret because the official version had become a work of fiction. This is what our finances actually look like. Now here's what we reported to investors last quarter. Claudia's eyes moved between the two documents, her expression carefully neutral. But I caught the slight widening of her pupils when she saw the discrepancies. The revenue inflation is just the start. I continued, pulling up email threads. Here's Asher explicitly instructing me to create customer accounts that don't exist. Here's him telling the engineering team to fake user engagement metrics. And here, I opened a particularly damning Slack conversation, is him explaining how to make our churn rate disappear by reclassifying canceled accounts as paused for optimization. Jesus, Claudia muttered. This is systematic fraud designed to secure a Series C valuation of $500 million for a company worth maybe $50 million on a good day. I pulled up another document, but my personal favorite is this one. It was an invoice for $2.8 million in software licenses paid to a company called Synergy Solutions. Looks legitimate, right? Except Synergy Solutions is registered in Delaware to one Maxwell Lennox, Asher's cousin. They've never delivered a single piece of software, but we've paid them $8.4 million over the past year. Claudia was taking notes now, her handwriting rapid but precise. How many people know about this? Most of the senior team suspects something's wrong, but Asher's smart about compartmentalizing. Nobody has the full picture except me. I paused. Well, me and David, our CFO, but he's got 2 kids in college and can't afford to be a whistleblower. But you can? I thought about my empty apartment, my non-existent social life, the savings I'd accumulated through 60-hour weeks and skipped vacations. I can afford it more than I can afford to watch him destroy more lives. I'm going to need documentation, everything you can share. I can do better than that. I pulled out a USB drive I'd prepared that morning, just in case. This is everything: emails, financials, contracts, recordings of meetings where Asher explicitly instructed fraud, 2.3 gigabytes of evidence. Claudia stared at the drive like it might explode. You realize what you're doing? Burning it all down. I slid the drive across the table. I've got matches if you need them. She pocketed the drive carefully. This is going to take time to verify. I'll need to contact former employees, vendors, anyone who can corroborate. Asher will know you're the source. Let him. What's he going to do? Fire me twice? He could sue, claim you violated your NDA, stole proprietary information. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had all day. He could try, but discovery's a bitch when you've been committing fraud. Besides, I pulled out another document. My employment contract has a whistleblower protection clause. I insisted on it when I joined. Asher never read it, just like he never reads anything that doesn't have his picture on it. Claudia's respect was evident now. You've been planning this. I've been preparing for it. There's a difference. I hoped I'd never need to use any of this, that somehow Asher would have a come-to-Jesus moment and start running the company ethically. But hope doesn't pay invoices or keep good people employed. What about the employees? When this comes out, most of them will be relieved. The good ones have already started leaving. The rest are trapped by visa requirements or financial obligations. They deserve better than slowly drowning in Asher's delusions. We talked for another hour. I walked her through the intricate web of Asher's deceptions, the shell companies, the fake customers, the engineered metrics. With each revelation, I felt lighter, like I was shedding weight I'd carried for too long. One more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. Asher's planning to announce the Series C next month. He's already in due diligence with 3 firms. They haven't caught any of this? Due diligence is only as good as the documents you provide. And Asher's very good at providing the right documents. But if your story breaks before they wire the money, it will, Claudia assured me. This is exactly the kind of story my editor lives for. Tech bro fraud, employees suffering, investors being deceived. It's got everything. Except a happy ending. Those are overrated in journalism. She stood, extending her hand. Thank you, Mia. I know this wasn't easy. I shook her hand, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. Easy decisions don't usually matter. It's the hard ones that define us. After Claudia left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching the world pass by outside. My phone had accumulated 37 messages, 12 missed calls, and one very threatening email from Asher demanding I return all company property immediately. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, the one I'd retained 6 months ago when I'd realized this day might come. Then I ordered another coffee and began planning my next moves. The war had begun. Asher had fired the first shot, but I'd just handed Claudia Monroe a nuclear arsenal. The question now is whether she'd use it effectively and whether I'd survive the fallout. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Mia, this is James Chen from the engineering team. I heard what happened. That was fucked up. Thanks, James. I appreciate. No, listen. A bunch of us are meeting tonight. Off the record. We're tired of this shit. If you're doing what I think you're doing, we want to help. I closed my eyes, feeling the first spark of hope. Where and when? Murphy's Bar, 8 p.m., back room. Priya's organizing it. I'll be there. I hung up and smiled. Asher thought he'd isolated me, cut me off from the herd. But he'd forgotten that loyalty earned through competence and respect runs deeper than fear. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. I met with my lawyer, who assured me that my whistleblower protections were solid and that Asher's threats were, legally speaking, horse shit. I began reaching out to my network, letting key people know I was now available for consulting work. The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Apparently, my reputation extended far beyond Brightcore's toxic bubble. By evening, I'd already fielded 3 job offers and half a dozen consulting inquiries. The tech world was small, and word traveled fast. Several CEOs reached out personally, having heard about the scene at Brightcore. None of them seemed surprised. Asher's reputation, it turned out, preceded him more than he knew. Murphy's Bar was a dive in the best sense. Dim lighting, worn leather booths, and a clientele that valued drinking over networking. The back room was already crowded when I arrived. I recognized most of the faces, engineers, designers, even a few people from sales. The ones who did actual work while Asher played CEO. Priya had commandeered a large table, her laptop open, surrounded by printouts. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of anger and determination. Mia, okay, people, she's here. Let's get started. I grabbed a beer from the bar and joined the group. The energy was electric, the kind that comes from shared purpose and nothing left to lose. First things first, Priya said. We all know why we're here. Asher's lost his goddamn mind, and we're tired of enabling it. The question is, what do we do about it? I already did something, I said quietly. I talked to Claudia Monroe today, gave her everything. The room erupted. Some cheered, others looked terrified. A few seemed calculating. Priya held up her hand for silence. Good, that's a start. But one source isn't enough. Not for a story this big. She's going to need corroboration. She looked around the room. Who's willing to talk? Hands raised slowly. First one, then another, until over a dozen people had volunteered. Engineers who'd been forced to fake data. salespeople who'd been pressured to lie to clients, designers who'd watched their work get butchered by Asher's whims. "I've got chat logs," offered Sam from back-end development. "Asher directly ordering us to inflate user numbers before investor calls." "I have emails about the Synergy Solutions thing," added Catherine from accounting. I was told to never question those invoices, no matter how sketchy they looked. One by one, people shared their pieces of the puzzle. Together, they painted a picture of systematic deception that went even deeper than I'd known. Asher hadn't just been cooking the books. He'd been running multiple schemes simultaneously, each department unknowingly enabling another's fraud. "Holy shit," someone muttered. "We're all going to jail." "No," I said firmly. "We're not. We were employees following orders, documenting our objections when we could. The legal liability falls on leadership, specifically on Asher and any board members who knew and did nothing." "What about our jobs?" asked Marcus, looking younger than his 25 years. "When this comes out..." "The company's probably finished," I admitted. "But would you rather have it die quick and clean or slowly bleed out while Asher gets richer?" The vote was unanimous. Quick and clean won. We spent the next 3 hours organizing. Priya created a secure channel for sharing evidence. Those willing to speak with Claudia provided their contact information. We established a communication protocol that would keep us coordinated while maintaining plausible deniability. "What about current employees who aren't here?" someone asked. "The ones still drinking the Kool-Aid?" "We protect them as much as possible," I said. "This isn't about punishing true believers. It's about stopping Asher before he destroys more lives." By 11 p.m., we had a plan. Multiple sources would reach out to Claudia independently, providing different angles of the same story. The evidence would be overwhelming, incontrovertible. Asher's house of cards would collapse, but we'd make sure the debris didn't crush innocence. As the meeting broke up, Priya pulled me aside. "You know he's going to come after you personally." "Let him try. I've got nothing to hide." "That's not what I mean." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Asher's got connections, the kind that can make problems disappear. You need to be careful." I thought about the USB drive I'd given Claudia, the backup copies stored in 3 different cloud services, the paper trail I'd maintained. I've been careful for 2 years. Now it's time to be dangerous. The next morning, I woke to find my LinkedIn flooded with notifications. Asher had posted a lengthy screed about letting go of team members who can't embrace innovation and the courage to make hard decisions. It was clearly aimed at me, though he was careful not to use my name. The comments section was a battlefield. Some praised his bold leadership, but others pushed back. Former employees began sharing their own stories, carefully worded to avoid legal action but clear in their implications. The narrative was already shifting. My phone rang. "Claudia, your friends have been busy," she said without preamble. "I've had 8 people contact me since yesterday. The stories they're telling..." "Mia, this is bigger than just financial fraud." "What do you mean?" "There are allegations of sexual harassment, discrimination, wage theft. One engineer claims Asher threatened to have him deported if he didn't manipulate data." I sank into my couch. I'd known Asher was toxic, but this... How solid are the claims? "I'm verifying everything, but so far, they check out. Several people have contemporaneous documentation. This isn't just a story about startup fraud anymore. It's about systemic abuse of power." "When will you publish?" "My editor wants it fast, but I need at least a week to fact-check everything. Can you hold out that long?" A week? 7 days of Asher potentially discovering what was happening, of possible retaliation, of watching him continue to destroy lives? I'll manage. Good. And Mia? You might want to stay away from the office. Asher's apparently been asking questions about who you've been talking to. After we hung up, I made a decision. Staying defensive wouldn't work. If Asher wanted a fight, I'd give him one he wouldn't forget. I opened Twitter, crafting my first post carefully. After 2 years of building Dot's Bright Core Labs from 10 to 150 employees, I was fired yesterday for lacking innovation. Funny how maintaining accurate financial records is considered rigid thinking in some circles. Startup life need leadership. I tagged several prominent tech journalists and VCs I knew. Within an hour, it had been retweeted hundreds of times. The comments ranged from supportive to skeptical. But the conversation had started. Asher took the bait beautifully. Within 2 hours, Brightcore's official account posted a response. We wish Maya Hartley the best, but must correct misinformation. Performance issues and culture fit matter more than tenure. Brightcore remains committed to transparency and excellence. The ratio was immediate and brutal. People who'd never heard of Brightcore suddenly knew two things. They'd fired a female executive, and they were being defensive about it. Asher had wanted to control the narrative. Instead, he'd handed me a megaphone. I spent the day strategically engaging with the conversation, never saying anything actionable, never violating my NDA, but asking pointed questions that others could answer. Interesting how my performance issues never came up during my reviews. Anyone else experience sudden performance problems at their startup? The floodgates opened. Stories poured out from across the tech industry, but a suspicious number seemed to involve Brightcore or Asher's previous companies. A pattern emerged that even casual observers could see. By evening, Asher was in full damage control mode. He scheduled an emergency all-hands for the next morning, sent a company-wide email about maintaining focus during external noise, and according to my sources, had screamed at the PR team for 45 minutes. I was pouring a glass of wine, toasting my first successful day of unemployment, when my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera to see a process server. The lawsuit was even more ridiculous than I'd expected. Asher was suing me for defamation, breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, and somehow, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought were $10 million. I photographed every page and sent them to my lawyer, who called within minutes, laughing. This is desperation disguised as legal action, she said. Half of these claims are nonsense, and the other half would require discovery that he really doesn't want. I'll file a response, but honestly, this helps us more than hurts. How do you figure? Because now you're not just a disgruntled ex-employee, you're someone he's trying to silence with a frivolous lawsuit. The optics are terrible for him. She was right. Within hours of my posting about the lawsuit, legal Twitter had descended like vultures. Lawyers dissected the filing, pointing out its flaws, mocking its overreach. Lennox vs. Hartley started trending, with people sharing stories of CEOs who'd tried to silence critics through litigation. Asher had made a crucial error. He'd assumed I'd fold under legal pressure, that the threat of financial ruin would shut me up. But I'd spent 2 years watching him operate. I knew his playbook, his weaknesses, his tells, and I knew something he didn't. The truth was my best weapon. The next few days blurred together in a symphony of strategic chaos. Claudia worked her sources while I coordinated with the growing resistance inside Brightcore. Every move Asher made to contain the situation only spread it further. He tried to lock down internal communications, so employees started using personal phones and encrypted apps. He demanded NDAs from current staff, so more people quit and immediately went public. He hired a crisis management firm, but their first recommendation, that he apologize and step back, sent him into such a rage that they dropped the account within 48 hours. Meanwhile, I was building something new. The consulting offers had crystallized into a real opportunity. 3 former Brightcore employees and I were discussing launching our own firm, built on the radical principle of actual transparency and ethical operations. It was energizing to think about creation instead of destruction. But first, the destruction had to be complete. Thursday morning, 5 days after my firing, Claudia called with an update. We're accelerating the timeline. My editor wants to run the first piece Monday morning. First piece? This is going to be a series. The main financial fraud story runs Monday. The workplace culture investigation follows Wednesday. Then a Friday feature on the larger issues in startup governance. She paused. Asher's going to know it's coming. His lawyers have already reached out, trying to get ahead of it. What did your legal team say? That he should be more worried about the SEC than about us. That afternoon, the dominoes started falling faster. A prominent VC tweeted that they were re-evaluating their interest in Brightcore's Series C. Within hours, the other two firms followed suit. The round that Asher had been counting on. The one that would validate all his lies and make him legitimately wealthy. Evaporated like morning mist. His response was predictably unhinged. According to my sources, he called an emergency board meeting, ranted about conspiracies and jealous competitors, and demanded the board do something about the attacks on the company. The board, composed primarily of investors who'd suddenly realized their due diligence had been lacking, did indeed do something. They announced an independent investigation into the company's finances and operations, effectively neutering Asher's power while they figured out how badly they'd been deceived. Friday night, I was at home, reviewing business plans for the new consulting firm. When my phone lit up with notifications, someone had leaked internal Brightcore emails to TechCrunch. Not the fraud stuff, that was Claudia's story, but embarrassing day-to-day communications that showed Asher's narcissism in full flower. There were emails where he berated employees for not applauding long enough after his speeches, messages demanding that his photo be made larger on the company website, a memorable thread where he spent 6 paragraphs explaining why the coffee in the break room was undermining our excellence. It was petty, juvenile stuff, but it served a purpose. It made him look ridiculous, transformed him from a potentially dangerous adversary into a joke. By the time Claudia's serious journalism dropped, people would be primed to believe the worst about him. I didn't leak those emails. I didn't have to. When you create a culture of fear and resentment, when you treat people as disposable, eventually someone decides they have nothing left to lose. Asher had created his own army of enemies. I'd just shown them where to aim. Saturday was quiet, the calm before the storm. I met with my lawyer to review our response to Asher's lawsuit. She'd crafted something beautiful, a counterclaim that not only dismantled his accusations but set up a wrongful termination suit that would, as she put it, make his balls retract into his throat. The best part, she explained, is that everything in our filing is provable. We have documents, witnesses, recordings. He has bluster and hurt feelings. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, Claudia's first article would drop and everything would change. I'd pulled the trigger on a weapon that would destroy not just Asher, but potentially dozens of careers, millions in investment, and whatever legitimate innovation might have existed at Brightcore. I made tea and sat on my balcony, watching Denver sleep below. Was I doing the right thing? The question had haunted me all week. But then I thought about James, the engineer who'd been threatened with deportation, about Lisa in sales, who'd been pressured to lie to customers until she had a breakdown, about all the people who'd believed in something real before Asher had poisoned it. Sometimes I decided the right thing and the necessary thing were the same, even if they hurt. Monday morning, 5 a.m. Mountain Time. Claudia's article went live on Insight Weekly's website with the headline, "The $500 million Mirage, Inside Brightcore Labs' Systematic Fraud." I read it with my coffee, impressed by her thoroughness. She'd woven together financial analysis, employee testimonies, and documentary evidence into a damning narrative that left no room for doubt. Asher wasn't named in every paragraph, but his presence loomed over the entire piece like a malevolent spirit. The article laid out the fake revenue, the shell companies, the manufactured metrics. But Claudia had done more than just expose fraud. She'd humanized the victims. There were quotes from employees about working 100-hour weeks to hit impossible targets. Stories of people who'd quit without other jobs lined up because they couldn't stomach the deception anymore. My phone started buzzing at 5:30. Reporters, investors, former colleagues, industry contacts. Everyone wanted to know more. I ignored most of them, following my lawyer's advice to let the story speak for itself. At 7 a.m., I opened LinkedIn and Twitter to watch the explosion in real time. The article was everywhere, shared by influential VCs, analyzed by startup founders, dissected by business school professors. Bright core scandal was trending nationally. Asher's response came at 8:15 a.m., clearly written by lawyers but posted from his personal Twitter. I am aware of the false and defamatory article published by Insight Weekly. These allegations are baseless and appear to be coordinated by disgruntled former employees. We will be pursuing all legal remedies. Brightcore remains committed to our mission and our stakeholders. The ratio was immediate and merciless. Someone had screenshotted his previous tweets about radical transparency and building trust through truth. Others posted excerpts from the article highlighting the documentary evidence. A few brave current employees even chimed in, confirming details from behind anonymous accounts. By noon, the story had jumped from tech Twitter to mainstream media. CNBC wanted interviews. The Wall Street Journal was preparing their own investigation. Bloomberg ran a segment on startup fraud that featured Brightcore prominently. But the real bloodbath was happening behind the scenes. According to my sources, the office was in chaos. Employees were either absent or huddled in groups, trying to figure out if they had legal exposure. The engineering team had stopped pretending to work entirely. Sales had canceled all their calls, knowing that no one would buy from a company about to implode. The board called an emergency meeting for 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., the announcement came. Asher Lennox had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The board expressed concern about the allegations and promised full cooperation with any regulatory inquiries. It was corporate speak for, "We're throwing him under the bus before it runs us over too." Asher didn't go quietly. By evening, he'd hired his own PR firm and was shopping around a counter-narrative. According to this version, he was a visionary leader brought down by jealous subordinates who couldn't understand his innovative methods. He was particularly venomous about me, painting me as a bitter woman who'd been rejected romantically and sought revenge. That was a mistake. The Twitter mob, already primed for blood, turned the romantic rejection claim into a meme. Photoshopped images of Asher as various infamous nice guys flooded social media. Someone created a parody account called Sad Lennox Boy that tweeted increasingly absurd claims about why successful women had friend-zoned him. It was cruel, juvenile, and devastatingly effective. In trying to destroy my credibility, Asher had turned himself into a laughingstock. You can recover from being seen as a fraud. It's much harder to recover from being a joke. Tuesday brought new revelations. Former employees from Asher's previous companies started sharing their stories. The pattern was consistent: rapid growth fueled by deception, followed by spectacular collapse, with Asher somehow always landing softly while others crashed and burned. A former CFO from his second startup wrote a brutal Medium post titled, "I Should Have Warned You." She detailed how Asher had pressured her to falsify numbers, then fired her when she refused, then sued her into silence. She'd watched him fail upward to Brightcore and said nothing. Paralyzed by legal threats and professional fear, "I'm breaking my NDA by writing this," she concluded. "Let him sue me. Some things matter more than money." Her courage inspired others. By Tuesday afternoon, 12 former employees from 3 different Asher companies had gone public with similar stories. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a single bad decision or a startup that got out of hand. This was a serial predator who used corporate structures as weapons. Wednesday morning, Claudia's second article dropped. A culture of fear inside Brightcore's toxic workplace. This one was harder to read. The harassment allegations were detailed and credible. The discrimination was systematic. The wage theft was blatant. But what really turned my stomach were the psychological manipulation tactics Asher had employed. He'd created an environment where employees monitored each other for signs of disloyalty. He'd instituted radical transparency policies that were actually surveillance systems. He'd turned the office into a panopticon where everyone was afraid and no one was safe. There was an entire section about me, based on interviews with people who'd worked under me. They described how I'd tried to shield them from the worst of Asher's behavior, how I'd fought for fair compensation and reasonable deadlines, how I'd been the only executive who actually listened to concerns. Mia was the canary in the coal mine. One engineer said, "When Asher fired her, we knew the mine was about to explode." The reaction to the second article was more subdued, but more serious. This wasn't just financial fraud anymore, it was a case study in how toxic leadership destroyed lives. Business schools started adding it to their curriculum. HR professionals wrote think pieces about warning signs. The conversation shifted from, "How did this happen?" to, "How do we prevent it from happening again?" Asher's response was to double down on legal threats. His lawyers sent cease and desist letters to seemingly everyone who'd ever criticized him. They demanded retractions from news outlets, threatened former employees, and filed motions to suppress evidence. It was a spectacular display of missing the point. Thursday was when the government got involved. The SEC announced a formal investigation into Brightcore's financial practices. The Department of Labor opened an inquiry into the wage theft allegations. The Colorado Attorney General's office started looking into fraud charges. More importantly for Asher, the IRS became interested in those payments to his cousin's shell company. Tax evasion, it turns out, is still the government's favorite way to take down people who think they're untouchable. The board met again Thursday evening. This time, there was no corporate speak. The announcement was blunt. Asher Lennox had been terminated for cause, effective immediately. All of his equity was clawed back under the bad boy provisions of his contract. He was banned from the premises and prohibited from contacting employees. The king was dead, but the kingdom was in ruins. Friday's final article was Claudia's masterpiece, The Unicorn Factory: How Silicon Valley Enables Founders Like Asher Lennox. She placed Brightcore in the larger context of startup culture, where growth at any cost was gospel and due diligence was often more theater than investigation. She interviewed VCs who admitted they'd seen red flags but ignored them because the numbers looked good. Board members from other failed startups explained how they'd been seduced by charismatic founders spouting disruption rhetoric. The article wasn't just an autopsy of Brightcore, it was an indictment of an entire system that rewarded sociopaths who could speak the language of innovation. But buried in the bleakness was hope. Claudia highlighted the employees who'd spoken up, the whistleblowers who'd risked everything, the people building better companies based on actual values rather than PR speak. She ended with a quote from me. "The tech industry doesn't have to be this way. We can build innovative companies without destroying people. We can disrupt markets without disrupting lives. It starts with remembering that metrics are meant to measure success, not replace it." By Friday evening, I was exhausted. The week had been a marathon of interviews, legal consultations, and strategic decisions. But as I sat in my apartment, wine in hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. My phone rang. "Priya." "We did it," she said simply. "He's gone. It's over." "It's not over," I corrected. "Brightcore is probably finished. People are going to lose their jobs. The good work some teams did will be lost. Maybe, but maybe something better can be built from the ashes." She paused. "Speaking of which, you know half the engineering team wants to join your new consulting firm, right?" I laughed. "We haven't even filed the paperwork yet." "Doesn't matter. You stood up to him. You protected us when you could and fought for us when you couldn't. That's the kind of leadership people actually want to follow." After we hung up, I thought about leadership. Asher had all the trappings, the vision speeches, the executive presence, the ability to make people believe impossible things. But leadership wasn't about making people follow you. It was about helping them get where they needed to go. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Brightcore entered a death spiral, eventually selling its few legitimate assets to a competitor for pennies on the dollar. Most employees landed safely, their association with the scandal actually making them more attractive to ethical companies looking to poach talent. Asher fought to the end. He declared bankruptcy to avoid personal liability. He launched a podcast about being canceled by woke culture. He even tried to start a new company, which lasted exactly as long as it took for potential investors to Google his name. The last I heard, he was teaching a masterclass on resilient leadership in the face of adversity. The reviews were not kind. As for me, The consulting firm launched with 10 founding members, all refugees from Brightcore's implosion. We specialized in helping startups build sustainable operations and ethical cultures. It turned out there was quite a market for consultants who'd survived the worst of startup culture and lived to tell the tale. 6 months after that terrible Monday morning, when Asher had fired me, I was having lunch with Claudia. She was working on a book about the Brightcore scandal, trying to capture the larger lessons about power, deception, and the courage to speak truth. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Everything that happened after you gave me that USB drive?" I thought about it. The lawsuit, eventually dismissed with prejudice. The threats, mostly empty. The stress of watching a company I'd helped build crumble to dust. The satisfaction of watching a predator face consequences. The pride of building something new and better. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that so many people were hurt, but I don't regret doing it." "Even though you could have just walked away, found another job, and let someone else deal with Asher?" "Especially because I could have walked away." I smiled. That's what he counted on, that everyone would choose the easy path, the safe path, that we'd all be too scared or too comfortable to fight back. "But you weren't—" I was terrified, I admitted. But I was more terrified of what would happen if he kept getting away with it. How many more James would be threatened? How many more Lisas would have breakdowns? How many more investors would lose money they'd earned honestly? "So you lit the fuse." "I lit the fuse," I agreed, "and I'd do it again." Claudia raised her coffee cup. "To lighting fuses." I clinked my cup against hers. "To burning down what needs to be burned." Outside the restaurant window, Denver's tech district bustled with its usual energy. New startups were being born, new dreams being funded, new promises being made. Some would succeed honestly. Others would follow Asher's path until someone else lit a fuse. But that was tomorrow's battle. Today, I had a company to build, a team to lead, and a future that didn't involve managing someone else's lies. My name is Mia Hartley. I was fired for refusing to enable a narcissist's fraud. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And if you're reading this while trapped in your own Brightcore, working for your own Asher, documenting your own folder of outrages, know this: you're not alone. The fuse is there, waiting. Sometimes the hardest part isn't lighting it. Sometimes the hardest part is believing you deserve better than slowly drowning in someone else's delusions. You do. Light the fuse.